Good afternoon, everyone. It's terrific to see some familiar faces on the call today. Welcome to today's new faculty Zoom. Today we are featuring Dr. Rachel Gevlin, who is Assistant Professor of English at Birmingham-Southern College. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Melissa Bostrom, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development. And today's event is brought to you in collaboration with the Office of Postdoctoral Services. My intrepid co-pilot, Molly Starback, the director of the postdoc office, is also on the call with us today. And we're so glad that you're joining us. Let me go ahead and just share just a little bit of background about Dr. Gevlin with all of you. And I know she'll fill in some more of that as we get into our questions. So Dr. Gevlin graduated from Bennington College with a BA in Interdisciplinary Studies, and then she received her PhD in English from Duke in 2020. Last year, she was teaching literature and academic writing as a visiting assistant professor at Monmouth College while she continued to work on her book project. Now, during her time at Duke, Rachel was active as a leader in the English department student organization and served as a representative to the faculty of her department. She also co-authored a successful proposal for the Graduate School's Professional Development Grant to bring English PhD alumni in a variety of careers back to campus to connect with current students. And she was an important voice for professional development and support for career diversity in the English department. And some of you might already know that about her because she wrote some posts for the Graduate School's Professional Development blog about those endeavors. So those live on in fame now. Something you may not know about Rachel, which I did not know until a couple years ago, was that in her life prior to graduate school, she spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso teaching middle school math. And as part of her efforts there, she was part of an initiative to provide sex education to middle school students. So I will say to you, as the parent of a middle school girl, I do not think there is any higher qualification for sainthood than teaching sex education to middle school students. And I'm so delighted that we can feature perhaps Saint Dr. Rachel Gevlin on today's call. We're so pleased that she's made time to share her insights with us today. So we'll begin the conversation with the 5 career questions that we ask all of our guests, and then we'll move on to address questions that came in through the registration. Feel free to ask questions using raise hand or just raising your hand in the Zoom window, because we can see everybody really well today. And you can also put questions in the chat if you're in a place where you don't feel comfortable being on audio. So please join me in a warm virtual round of applause for our guest today, Dr. Rachel Gevlin.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
So Rachel, can you tell us a bit about Birmingham-Southern College and your responsibilities there as a new assistant professor?
Yeah, so Birmingham-Southern, or for shorthand, much easier to say, BSC, is a 1,200 student liberal arts college in the city of Birmingham in Alabama. And the English department is actually quite large for a school of this size. I think currently on faculty, we have 11 people, including the ladies who run the writing center. And for some comparison, my last institution, which serves only a slightly smaller number of students, only had 4 people, including myself, in the English department. So this has been a change in that sense. And what else can I tell you? So it's pretty common, I think, for tenure track professors to not have any service requirements as part of their job. So really my position this year is to teach and to learn the ropes of the college. So at BSC, I have a 3-1-3 teaching load, which is to say that I teach 3 courses in the fall, 3 courses in the spring, and BSC actually has a winter term that runs for 4 weeks in January. So that's that one in between the 2 3s. Yeah, so right now I'm teaching a writing course, a 200 level intro to literature course, and a course in my field on the origins of the novel, which will be a similar breakdown for every semester that I'm here. I'll always teach one section of writing, one 200 level course, and one advanced course. Yeah, so this year, really just focusing on teaching, focusing on getting some new courses developed and trying to meet people and learn more about the college before I'm thrown into advising and other service requirements next year.
So it sounds like plenty to tackle for this year.
It is.
I know you had the experience in applying for faculty jobs the prior year too, during a time when it wasn't the pandemic, and then this past year you were applying kind of during the pandemic in your process. How did you adapt to changes in the application and interview process and onboarding for your position due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so it's been sort of a wild ride. So my first year on the job market was fall of 2019, and I did a full round of applications and got some interviews and even a campus visit in February of 2020. And then nothing came through that year, and I ended up seeing this posting for this visiting assistant professor position that I was doing last year, right at the end of March when I was in a great headspace, and applied to that job, and all of that was online. So the regular Zoom interview, which I think pretty typically is online these days, followed by the campus visit, which was not a campus visit at all. That was on Zoom as well. And then I went through the same exact thing applying for this job at BSc, where I had actually 2 Zoom interviews before the quote unquote campus visit, which was completely on Zoom again. And the comparing that all of those 3 experiences, there are blessings and curses to all of this being on Zoom. In one respect, the campus visit part I actually found to be more pleasant being on Zoom than it would have been in person. Obviously, there are drawbacks of I moved to 2 cities in the past 14 months that I had not been to before I moved here. I hadn't even been to the state of Alabama before I moved here in August. So that was a scary drawback. But campus visits are very intense, and often they are intended by the search committee to be sort of this, effectively 36-hour long interview with very few breaks, and even the breaks don't often function as real breaks. But when you're doing it on Zoom, those 15-minute breaks, you can really just close your computer and talk to your dog and have a snack and not worry about, finding private space to really collect yourself again. So in that respect, it was actually nice to do it all over Zoom. I did, for the BSc interview process, actually have 2 interviews, and I don't know how many other schools are doing this these days. But they wanted to do more Zoom interviews before the campus interview, before they decided who they were going to do the Zoom campus interviews for, because they knew they weren't going to meet me before I moved here. So I actually had to have a more intensive preliminary interview process before going into the campus interview section. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about that. Oh, and then the other thing that's been strange about adjusting to applying for jobs and then getting a job during the pandemic is that because everybody is, for good reason, still pandemic cautious, it's been trickier meeting my new colleagues. Last year, there was a small cohort of people who had campfires in rural Illinois all the way through the winter. And we were sitting out there in negative 15-degree weather. And that's what I sacrificed for having friends at my new job. But most of my colleagues last year, I did not meet until a faculty party in May. And then I'd been working at the school for 9 months, and people came up to me being like, "Oh, you're the person in the English department who's leaving in a month." Like, so nice to meet you. And this year, things are a little more fluid. Things are also a little more fluid in Alabama than they were in Illinois. So I have been able to meet people, but it's still quite apparent that there are social events that would have happened already campus-wide and then just within my own department that aren't happening right now. So that means I have to put a little bit of extra effort, and also I think have a little more patience in terms of figuring out what my social life here is going to look like.
Thank you for being so candid about not just the the professional implications of the search, but also the personal implications and things that the folks on the call might think about for themselves. So, Rachel, in your experience, given the impact of the pandemic, are there any specific experiences, credentials, or qualifications that your institution or department now seeks in new hires? And I'm thinking of, as an example, online teaching experience, but maybe there are others I'm not thinking of.
Yeah, so I think online teaching experience is definitely a plus these days, no matter what field you're in. I also know that for this job, the job ad clearly stipulated a desire for someone who has experience in either digital humanities or public humanities. And while I know that not all jobs explicitly say that, for example, my Monmouth position didn't say that, the fact that I emphasized those things in my application, I learned after the fact, were actually made me stand out among other applicants. And I think part of what that has to do with, and this goes along with another thing that I think is, apart from having some sort of something in your application that speaks to either a DH or public humanities, having a really clear idea of the value of a liberal arts education, if that's the sort of institution you're applying to. That's been my experience so far, so that's what I can speak to. Or having a very specific idea, regardless of what the value of an English degree or whatever field you're in, the value of what that degree is. I think in graduate school, translating the value of what we do to students and potential parents of those students is something that sort of gets lost in the conversation. But I find that I was asked versions of that question: what's the value of a liberal arts degree? What's the value of an English degree? Over and over and over again by different institutions. And I think the public humanities and DH stuff feeds into that conversation, because these departments want you to be able to translate what you do to an audience. Either translate your research certainly to the classroom, but if you can translate your research to the wider campus community or even the wider community beyond campus, then that really does important work of validating why these humanities departments exist in the first place, which there is a lot of anxiety about across the country. So I think if you can have a really clear idea of what the degree does for your students, that can really help your application. The other thing I would say is that something that I was asked in both of my interview processes was regarding the experience that the students are coming to college with now. So high school students, depending on what year you start your position, they might have had one to 3 years of college or of high school that were during COVID, which means that their educations have been severely impacted, either being moved completely or partially online for those years. And as someone who teaches writing, it's really clear the students who are coming to college who had 1 to 2 years of English classes online when they normally would have been in person. So I think understanding where current college students are coming from and then having a plan about how you're going to adapt your classes for those students. So for example, I have been asked in interviews about for writing student, how I adapt writing classes for students who are coming to college not knowing how to break up paragraphs and not knowing how to use commas, which is a very surprisingly very real thing. So giving some thought to where students are coming from now because of the pandemic, and having a clear response to that, I think can also be very helpful.
That's a really thoughtful and insightful answer. Thank you. So what advice do you have, Rachel, for graduate students and postdocs who are planning to apply for faculty jobs soon? What suggestions can you offer to them?
Yeah, so I think anyone who's here or anyone who ever watches this recording is doing a good thing in using the professional development resources, which I did find incredibly helpful. And I would extend that to Maria Wisdom is an amazing resource on campus. If your department offers, I know the English department offers a jobs workshop, which I took and found incredibly helpful. And the reason those things are helpful in particular is I would just recommend getting as many people to look at your job materials as many times as possible across the longest period possible. Those materials evolve a lot from your first draft, and they need the time to evolve to their best version. So taking advantage of all of those things on campus. I also recommend doing a mock job talk or a teaching demo. It sucks, it's terrifying. I did a mock job talk and it went fine, but not great. But I'm way more scared of what my friends and colleagues in grad school think of me than these people that I haven't met before on the search committee. So if you can get through that, then it actually made my real job talk that I did for that job much better. And the more times you do those sorts of things, like anything, the better you get at them. So the first job talk I did at Duke as a mock job talk was fine, but not great. The second one I did for the in-person on-campus interview was a little bit better. The ones that I've done since then over Zoom have been even better than that one. So it is worth it to put in the time to practice those. I also would mention, this is not something that I knew until I was in the thick of it, but there's a whole second application cycle. So tenure track jobs for the humanities, you apply, usually in the fall, sometime from September to November, applications are due. Interviews happen usually December or January. Campus visits happen in February. And I thought my first year on the market that was it after that. But what happens is that then tenure track people get hired, and some people who are already at institutions get hired, and then those institutions need to fill that gap. So there's the whole second application cycle that starts in the spring for VAP positions. And I know that taking a job that you know right off the bat is not going to be for more than a year or two is not a feasible option for some people. But if it is a feasible option for you, I found out from a colleague here at BSC that part of the reason I got this job is because I had the experience of having been in a VAP position before. And it allowed me to speak to a lot of different aspects of the job that I just wouldn't have been able to speak to earlier. So coming straight out of Duke. So I think that's really useful information to know, both for understanding just, how to time your applications, but also for anxiety. So it's not all over if you don't have something by February. Other things do show up. And I do think it's worthwhile to apply to those things if any of them look interesting to you. I'll also mention just two pieces of advice that people from my own program who were farther along than me gave me that I found incredibly useful. One of them is only apply to jobs that you would actually want to have. I know that we're all like dead set on being academics and having this job, and it sounds so great, but it is at the end of the day just a job, and there are bad versions of this job that are exploitative, and don't take those. Don't apply to everything. Apply to the things that actually sound like they're going to be the reason that you are getting into this in the first place. And then the other thing is that hiring committees are looking for people that can teach the classes that they need taught. And depending on the institution can raise the profile of the department, but they're also just looking for a colleague that they will want to work with potentially for the rest of their lives. It's such a weird profession to be hiring in that capacity. Like you're hiring someone who you might be friends with for the next 40 years. So it's important to remember that. I think the way this person phrased it to me is that like they're looking for someone that they would want to say hi to in the hallway for the next several decades. So it's not just about what's on your CV. It's about how affable and funny and, what a good colleague you can make yourself out to be.
That is also fantastic advice. I have to say, I've never thought about hiring an English faculty member in the same way that we might hire to, so to speak, a Supreme Court justice, that it is for life. There So Rachel, with the understanding that you're very new to BSc, do you have any insight or any sense of what the hiring outlook is like at BSc right now, given COVID and the pandemic?
Yeah, so my understanding from talking to other people and taking a peek at the MLA job list is that things are better than they were last year, pretty much across the board, which is a very low bar, but there we are. And that they're still not great. But that being said, BSc is hiring 5 tenure track lines this year, including one in English. Also, there are 4 other lines: philosophy, chemistry, religion, and art. So 4 out of 5 are actually in the humanities, which is pretty cool. And it's possible that there's even one more English tenure track line that's going to be approved later in the fall, although it's more likely that it'll happen next year. So there's actually quite a lot of turnover happening in my department right now. A lot of people are retiring and they're trying to replace those lines. So yeah.
That is very positive news indeed.
It is, yeah.
So Rachel, I want to turn to the question that came in through the registration in just a moment. But before I do, I want to just pause and see if anybody who's on the call wants to ask any follow-ups about what we've already discussed. And again, just feel free to either use the raise hand function or just, if you're on video, just put your hand up or just jump right in. All right, I waited the 10 seconds you have to wait in person, plus a couple more for Zoom time. And feel free to also put questions in the chat, y'all. So one of the questions that came in through the registration was from, I think, a fairly new PhD student asking, what were your specialization and dissertation topic, and how did you choose them?
Yeah, so I look at the intersection between masculinity and divorce law in the 18th and early 19th century novel. In its simplest terms, I look at a 70-year period in the novel where so-called good men have no sex and have no sexual history. And I came to this project when I was reading for my prelims in my 3rd year, and I just kept reading all of these novels where none of the good guys were having sex and none of the good guys ever talked about sex. And I just wondered why that was. It's also, so I was reading these books. I also took my prelims in the spring of 2017 and then was starting to write in the fall of 2017 when Me Too started becoming a thing. And so I was thinking about this question of male sexual conduct in the context of what was going on today and how we're grappling with those issues. So it was really important to me, and it's still important to me to be able to relate my project to the present in some way. I would say that that's a really useful thing for the job market, but it's also a useful thing for explaining it to my mother or my Aunt Kathy. And for me, my project's relatability to the present plays a really important role in keeping me engaged with it. So the more that I can relate it to what's going on today, then that makes me want to keep coming back to it. Which is really important because when you're choosing your dissertation topic, you're going to be working on it for the rest of your PhD. And then if you get an academic job and are writing a book on it, or even if just publishing articles on it, you're going to be writing about this thing for, minimum a decade, I would say. So it better be something that you care about and that you are excited to return to over and over again.
Fantastic. So our next question is, again, kind of returning in your mind to your graduate student experience. How does your job now compare on a day-to-day level to your time as a graduate student?
Yeah, it's sort of the direct inverse. Instead of spending all my time on research and at most teaching 1 class a semester, pretty much all of my energy and time is focused on teaching right now. Teaching a 3-3 load is it's a lot. It's really fun, but it's a lot. It takes a lot of time, especially at this point where one of the courses that I'm teaching right now, I've taught before, so I'm reusing lesson plans and just tweaking them a bit. But two of the courses I'm teaching are totally new for me, which means I have to do all of the reading along with my students, and then I have to plan the lessons too. So it takes up quite a bit of time. There's also been a big change in, when you're a grad student, you're very rarely expected to be in a particular place at a particular time. It's a really lovely thing about grad school. But now in this job at BSc, it's actually really nice. I only teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then I have office hours on other days. So I still don't have to go in every day, but I do have to be places at scheduled times much more frequently than I did at Duke. And that varies a lot from job to job. So at Monmouth last year, the writing classes I was teaching all met Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I would have classes that also met on Wednesday for my upper level courses. So depending on where you're at, your teaching schedule can be very, very different, even if that was technically the same teaching load as here. It just looked really different on a day-to-day basis. So doing a lot of teaching, teaching office hours, trying to make time for research. It's not impossible. It's sort of the same problem people have when they're writing their dissertations of like, you find all of the most fun ways to procrastinate and just really have to work at getting into any sort of writing habit. So I am currently working at getting into a good writing habit and have been working on that for the past 2 months, but hopefully one of these weeks.
That's great. That's always important. So another question that came in is asking, what are the most meaningful steps that third and fourth year students can be taking now to position themselves to be successful on the faculty job market in the future?
Great. So, I mean, I feel like probably the best response to that is just things I've already said in terms of taking advantage of different things that are offered across campus. I will say that I've found that, so I did the GSF certificate, and I found that really useful on the job market. So many jobs today look for someone who studies for a job in my field, someone who studies 18th century literature with subspecialties in gender and sexuality studies, or any number of other focuses. And if you have one of those that you can speak to, that does seem to be attractive to hiring committees. Also, it's worth noting that I didn't start doing the GSF certificate until I was actually already done with coursework. So it's a lot of those certificates actually have fairly minimal requirements of just 4 or 5 courses that if you're willing to do that in the latter half of your degree, you can still get it done. I found the CCT program, some of the classes really genuinely quite helpful. I can't remember which one it is now, where you actually, one of the projects is translating your research to people outside of your field. But as it turns out, that's like half of what interviews are about. On both of my search committees for both jobs, there were people because these are both such small liberal arts schools, the hiring committees had people from departments that weren't English. The first time around, there was someone from theater and someone from education on my search committee. This time around, there was someone from chemistry and someone from math on my search committee. So if you can have practiced making your research interesting to people who are very far afield from what you do, then that can be a really good skill to have. And then there are other things like, making your CV pretty and legible. Very, very useful skills that I would definitely recommend taking that coursework to people.
Excellent. That's so helpful. Well, Rachel, our time with you today has just flown by. It is already 1:30. I want to thank you so much for making time in what must be just a whirlwind schedule of your first semester on campus at BSc to share your insights and advice with us today. please, everyone, join me in a warm round of virtual applause for Dr. Rachel Gevlin. So delighted to feature you for this session today.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to see the face of English people.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Take good care.